They called him the Ghost Boss, not because he hid in the shadows, but because one day, he simply disappeared. No body. No arrest. No trace. Just silence. Before we dive in, don't forget to like this video, comment where you're watching from, and subscribe for more stories like this one. Frank Matthews wasn't born rich, but he was born with something better: charm and calculation. Brooklyn, 1940s. Street corners smelled like gasoline and ambition. By the time most kids were running errands, Frank was running small-time numbers, already outsmarting grown men. He wasn't loud. He didn't need to be. "Keep your mouth shut, your mind open," he'd say, and that line followed him through every deal, every dollar. By his 20s, Frank had found a rhythm between danger and discipline. He dressed clean, talked smooth, and never lost his temper, not in public. People said he could make a rival laugh while taking everything they owned. But behind the grin, there was a secret, a plan bigger than any man on the East Coast. And soon, the FBI would start hearing whispers of a name that didn't belong to any family they knew. He wasn't Italian. He wasn't connected. But he was about to build an empire that outgrew them all. And when the feds finally came looking, Frank Matthews was already gone. But that's getting ahead of the story. Brooklyn wasn't kind to dreamers, but Frank Matthews learned early that kindness had nothing to do with survival. He grew up in a neighborhood where men vanished over dice games, and mothers prayed their sons wouldn't end up in the system. Frank's mother worked double shifts, his father, gone before Frank could remember. By 13, he was hustling, not for thrills, but for groceries. The corner boys noticed his calm. The police noticed his silence. "He's got a businessman's brain," an old barber once said. Just born on the wrong block. That barber wasn't wrong. Frank wasn't built for small hustles. He studied how people moved, where money flowed, and how trust broke. While others bragged about stolen cash, Frank watched the man counting it. By the early 60s, he understood something most didn't: the real power wasn't in muscle, but in math. He knew margins, he knew supply, and he knew how to make everyone believe they needed him. Still, he wasn't cruel. Those who worked under him said he paid fair, never cheated, and never lied without reason. "Keep it clean," he'd remind them. "We're businessmen, not fools." But beneath that calm surface, the city was changing, and Frank was about to see opportunity where others only saw chaos. And that's where the rise begins. It started small, a few packages moving through Philly, a handshake deal in Harlem, a quiet connection no one dared question. But Frank Matthews had a gift. He saw systems where others saw streets. He realized the game wasn't about selling, it was about controlling flow. He didn't wait for opportunity, he built one. By his late 20s, Frank had turned a few ounces into an empire that stretched from New York to North Carolina. His operation ran smoother than most Fortune 500 companies. He hired accountants, used coded ledgers, and ran meetings like boardrooms. "If you can't count it," he'd say, "you can't keep it." And while others flashed gold and girls, Frank stayed measured: quiet suits, clean cars, never too flashy, never too humble. He didn't crave attention, he craved efficiency. Rumors said he was moving millions, but no one could prove it. Not the Italians. Not the feds. Not even the men working for him. They all saw just enough to stay loyal, or scared. But the higher he rose, the sharper his eyes became. He started noticing cracks, whispers from jealous allies, curious cops, and partners who smiled too easily. Because in the underworld, every rise casts a long shadow. And Frank was about to learn, shadows don't stay loyal for long. By the early 70s, Frank Matthews was untouchable. His reach spread across state lines, from the Bronx to Baltimore, from Carolina back to the heart of New York. He wasn't just another street boss, he was running a corporation made of ghosts. He didn't shout orders, he delegated. His lieutenants called him Mr. Matthews, never Frank. Respect wasn't demanded, it was earned through consistency and fear. Meetings took place in quiet hotel rooms. Cigarette smoke curled above polished briefcases. Frank spoke softly, letting silence do half the work. "Money talks," he'd say, "but silence seals the deal." Even the Italian families, who once laughed at a black man in their territory, now did business with him. They needed his routes, his discipline, his numbers. And Frank, always calm, played the long game. He bought properties under fake names, wired money through Caribbean accounts, and kept everything compartmentalized. Nobody knew the full picture except him. Not even his closest men. Yet power brings a strange kind of loneliness. Frank would often stand by his office window at night, the city lights flickering on his face, wondering how long order could hold before ambition tore it apart. Because every empire, no matter how silent, starts to echo. And Frank's echo was beginning to reach the wrong ears. It started with whispers, small, quiet things that grew teeth. A missing package here, a lie there, a man spending more than he should. Frank noticed it all. He always did. But this time, it wasn't about money. It was about loyalty. His crew had grown too fast. New faces, new greed. Some men started thinking Frank was getting soft, too polished, too careful. One of his old lieutenants, a man named Nate, began talking behind his back. "He thinks he's a businessman now," Nate said. "Forgot who put him on." When word reached Frank, he didn't shout. He invited Nate to dinner. The restaurant was quiet, candles glowing. Frank poured 2 glasses of wine and spoke calmly. "You ever hear of Caesar?" he asked. Nate frowned. "The salad guy?" Frank smiled, thin and cold. "No, the man who trusted too many friends." By the next morning, Nate was gone. No police report. No body. Just gone. The message was clear, loyalty wasn't optional. Still, something had shifted. Frank didn't like what the game was turning him into. The man who once built bridges was now burning them, one by one. And somewhere in a federal office, a new file was being opened, stamped with his name in red. The feds were done watching. They were coming. By 1972, Frank Matthews wasn't just a name in the streets, he was a problem on the federal radar. The FBI had watched him for years, tracing bank wires, tailing his couriers, tapping phones that went silent just before big moves. Agents couldn't believe it. A man who wasn't part of any Italian family had built one of the largest drug networks in America. And he'd done it without their permission. Inside his mansion in Staten Island, Frank read the papers, sipping coffee like it was just another morning. But he knew. The air had changed. He started seeing unmarked cars parked too long, hearing clicks on phone lines that shouldn't click. He told his girlfriend, "If they're watching, let them. They still don't know what they're looking at." Still, paranoia became his shadow. He stopped trusting even his oldest friends. Meetings shrank, phone calls shortened. Cash started moving out of the country, millions, hidden in offshore accounts and buried safes. But the feds weren't alone. The Mafia wanted him gone too, a man outside the rules, breaking their hierarchy, stealing their respect. Frank had outsmarted everyone for a decade. But the storm was closing in from both sides. And when it hit, Frank didn't run. He planned something no one saw coming. Summer of 1973. Heat rising off the asphalt, news headlines screaming about corruption, drugs, and money trails. And in the middle of it all, Frank Matthews. The FBI finally moved. Raids in Brooklyn, Durham, and Philly. Houses seized. Cars impounded. Millions in assets frozen. But Frank? He stayed calm, even as agents surrounded his mansion. "Mr. Matthews," one agent said, "it's over." Frank just smiled, adjusted his cufflinks, and replied, "You think this is all I am?" They found ledgers, phones, maps, everything but the money. And that's when they realized, the man had planned for this. Every number, every code, every offshore link pointed to a maze that ended in smoke. Bailed out for $325,000, a fortune then, Frank walked out of court wearing a tailored suit and a look that said he already knew the ending. He didn't fight. He didn't plead. He waited. Then, one day in July 1973, he told his girlfriend to pack a few bags. He kissed her, smiled, and said, "We'll make it right." That night, they vanished. No goodbye. No trace. No footprints leading out, just silence. And from that silence, a legend was born. Because men can run, but ghosts disappear. The world expected Frank Matthews to end up behind bars, but he never did. After that July night, every lead turned cold. Airports, borders, safe houses, nothing. Some said he fled to Africa. Others swore they saw him in Vegas, wearing sunglasses and a new name. The FBI searched for years. They froze accounts, chased rumors, and interrogated everyone who'd ever shaken his hand. But Frank had done something no one in his position had ever managed. He vanished with both his freedom and his fortune. Still, the idea of isolation haunted his legend. People pictured him alone somewhere, looking over an ocean, counting years instead of dollars. Maybe he missed the noise, the laughter in backrooms, the pulse of a city that once called him king. He didn't want power, one old associate said years later. He wanted control. And when the game got too dirty, he controlled his own ending. The Bureau never closed the case. His wanted poster stayed up for decades, a face frozen in time, eyes that seemed to know more than they should. Because disappearing wasn't escape. It was choice. And for Frank Matthews, silence was the last form of power left. Decades passed. Streets changed. The names of new hustlers replaced the old. But in every barbershop, every prison yard, every corner where stories survived, one name still lingered. Frank Matthews. They called him the one who beat the system. Not by violence, not by betrayal, but by vanishing with his mind intact and his money unclaimed. In a world where everyone either died young or ended up in a cell, Frank became a myth. Some said he'd built a quiet life somewhere warm, blending in, raising a family, maybe even reading the papers about his own disappearance. Others believed he was long gone, buried under a fake name, watching history forget him piece by piece. But legends don't fade that easily. His story became a whisper between hustlers, the idea that maybe you could outthink everyone, maybe you could leave before the fall. Even retired FBI agents admitted a grudging respect. He wasn't reckless, one said. He was smart. And that made him dangerous. Time turned Frank Matthews from a fugitive into folklore. And somewhere, maybe, a quiet old man smiled whenever he heard his ghost still haunting the headlines. Because the smartest movie ever made was never coming back. They say every man in the life either dies, flips, or fades. But Frank Matthews? He wrote a fourth option, disappear. He outsmarted lawmen, outlived rivals, and proved that real power isn't about what you show, it's about what you can walk away from. If he's alive somewhere, he'd be in his 80s now. Maybe sitting by a quiet window, coffee steaming, listening to a city that's forgotten his name. Or maybe he's long gone, but the myth of him still teaches something rare. Because Frank's story isn't just about money or crime. It's about control. The kind that comes from knowing when to leave the table. He built an empire without violence, crossed racial and criminal boundaries, and vanished before ego could drag him down. In the end, his biggest heist wasn't the millions he took, it was his own freedom. So the next time you hear about a man who beat the system, remember this: the ghost didn't just run, he rewrote the rules. He outlived the world he built, not because he was lucky, but because he never broke his word. Don't forget to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more true gangster stories like this one. Because some ghosts never stop teaching.